Hello, everyone. Good morning from Punta del Este, Uruguay, and very happy World Press Freedom Day week, since we are already passing the day for all of you. It's a pleasure to be here this morning in Uruguay, already afternoon in Europe, and for some colleagues connected from Asia, it's already evening, so thank you so much. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. My name is Guilherme Canela, and I'm the Chief of the Freedom of Expression and Safety of Journalists section at UNESCO headquarters in Paris. And it's a real pleasure to see that we are in another World Press Freedom Day, talking about this global drive on media freedom and freedom of expression that actually was created, was an idea that was born in a similar day like this, when we celebrate the World Press Freedom Day at The Hague, the Netherlands, in 2020. And last year in Namibia, we had the launching of the first activities, and this year we are already here to discuss some real implementation of the global drive. So it's really interesting to see that things are moving forward, where freedom of expression is in danger. It's in need for more cooperation, for more concrete actions. And as I'm sure we'll hear from our great speakers today, this is a fantastic cooperation between UNESCO, the High Commissioner on Human Rights Office, with a strong support from the government of the Netherlands. But you will also hear from colleagues from the field, the ones that are really benefiting from this program that's not only about financial resources, obviously it's also about financial resources, but is mainly about putting our minds together. UNESCO has some added value in this discussion from freedom of expression and safety of journalists. And our colleagues from the High Commissioner's Office has a very important complementary expertise in this area, but also when it comes to the field network, we have a complementary field network in this. So from both offices, from the High Commissioner's Office and UNESCO, I can say that we are very proud to be working even closer together in this partnership. So we will hear today some interesting remarks from different stakeholders involved with this program. And it's my pleasure to start with Ms. Bahia Tahzib-Lie. She is the Netherlands Human Rights Ambassador. Ambassador Bahia was in the very beginning of this initiative. It's always a pleasure to be in touch with her, and she is a strong supporter of what we are doing here. So, Ambassador, you have the floor. Good afternoon. Welcome.
Thank you so much, and you're very kind, Guilherme. Good morning, everyone gathered in Uruguay. It's afternoon here in The Hague. I'm delighted to join you online. I'm at quite some physical distance, but as to values and norms involving press freedom and the safety of journalists, I'm very close in heart with you. And I would like to extend a very big thank you to Uruguay and UNESCO for hosting this World Press Freedom Conference. As you said, it's significant that this conference builds on last year's official launch of the Global Drive for Media Freedom and the Safety of Journalists program. And it was last year my honor to take part in this inspiring launch. And I'm thrilled to be with you today at this showcase event, and we will hear more about the results. Thank you for inviting me to deliver the opening remarks. And as you, I'm extremely keen to hear about progress made since the launch. As you said, Guilherme, I take honestly great pride that my country, the Netherlands, is the driving force behind this important initiative, a multi-stakeholder initiative. In fact, as you said, the Global Drive is a direct outcome of the World Press Freedom Conference 2020, organized by UNESCO and the Netherlands. In the margins of that conference, the Dutch Minister of Foreign Affairs convened a ministerial meeting to address the importance of the safety of journalists worldwide. And this led to the adoption of a political statement called the Hague Commitment to increase the safety of journalists. And almost 60 countries have endorsed this call to action, which is extremely a significant number of countries, which is also an important signal. The Hague commitment, honestly, really hits the nail on the head. And that basically is that the global implementation of commitments pertaining to media freedom and the safety of journalists is lacking behind. And sadly, even deteriorating. The call's very goal is to persuade more countries to effectively use and actually implement the international norms and standards and apply those tools that are already in place, especially by offering some practical guidance on how to do so. The Global Drive program is effectively all about keeping the momentum going, created every year by the World Press Freedom Conference, and accelerating implementation throughout the world. Only then will we all be able to make a real difference for press freedom and keep our journalists safe. That's why the Netherlands decided to partner with UNESCO and OHCHR to assist countries to actually implement their relevant commitments. We also believe that this effort is a fitting contribution to mark this year's 10th anniversary of the UN Plan of Action and make it a truly living document. At the same time, I would also like to say it is actually really unfortunate that programs like the Global Drive are increasingly needed around the world. When we marked World Press Freedom Day yesterday, we were all reminded that brave journalists and media workers are every day risking their lives to keep us informed. We also learned yesterday that a record of 28 countries were rated very bad places for journalism in the 2022 World Press Freedom Index. This report warns that especially countries with autocratic regimes increasingly crack down on independent media outlets. Billions of people in countries such as, but certainly not only, China, Russia, Saudi Arabia, and Pakistan struggle to access independent and reliable information. It is alarming that gruesome and fundamental attacks on press freedom are taking place all over the world, both online and offline. And it's worrisome that the free press and independent media organizations are struggling to survive. It requires continuous efforts to safeguard press freedom in my own country, the Netherlands, and worldwide. The global pandemic has only exacerbated threats to independent media and blocked journalists' access to information sources and reporting in the field. Too many are increasingly subject to physical and verbal violence, continuous threats from authorities, intimidation, lawsuits, and imprisonments. They are even killed, and most perpetrators go unpunished. To just get an idea, in the past 5 years, UNESCO has recorded 400 killings of journalists worldwide, killed for investigating and reporting the facts and exposing the truth, for doing a job that's of great importance to all of us. UNESCO has also reported that almost 90% of the perpetrators go unpunished, so 9 out of 10. And this climate of impunity perpetuates the cycle of violence against journalists and the media, both physically and online. It is particularly alarming that women journalists are disproportionately threatened and harassed online. About 75% of all women journalists worldwide have faced multiple forms of discrimination, often intersecting with sexual orientation, race, religion, ethnicity, or gender identity. This escalation of online gender-based violence and harassment is of urgent concern and a serious threat to an inclusive and diverse media landscape. Some politicians are harming journalists further with anti-media rhetoric. This harsh reality makes it all the more necessary to stand up for a free press and the safety of journalists. In a world of increasing political and social division, a free, independent, and vibrant press is simply absolutely essential, especially since journalists supply the oxygen of well-functioning, free, and informed societies. They provide news and factual information to the public and stimulate inclusive public debate. They also serve as a watchdog for the public interest and hold state and non-state actors to account. So altogether, a free and safe press is thus fundamental to all human rights, to good governance, to democratic societies, and to sustainable development. So for all these reasons, the Netherlands consciously invests in building coalitions and joining positive forces with like-minded countries and partners, such as the Media Freedom Coalition. This coalition is a partnership of over 50 countries, all working to promote media freedom and ensure information as a public good. Our work and priorities in the area of media freedom can be summarized in 3 words: to prevent, protect, and prosecute. We do what we can to prevent attacks from happening, to protect journalists and media workers, especially women, and to prosecute perpetrators. As co-chair of the Media Freedom Coalition, the Netherlands strongly advocates for this 3P approach. We especially aim to strengthen the coalition's diplomatic and advocacy activities and make full use of the diplomatic tools at hand to cases of journalists in need. We believe very strongly that raising our collective voices together is more powerful and effective than making individual statements. It puts us in a stronger position to take effective action and have impact. The Global Drive program also is an excellent example of being stronger when working together. This empowering collaboration between the Netherlands, UNESCO, and OHCHR promotes media freedom and safeguards the safety of journalists in over 22 countries. Today, both UN entities will present significant progress made since the official launch of the initiative in May 21. They will share testimonies and interventions from partners and beneficiaries in the field. This will help us better understand the challenges, needs, concrete steps forward, and prospects for the coming year. I can't wait to become inspired and perhaps also challenged, which is very good, by today's session on the Global Drive. It's time to showcase results. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. You did a fantastic summary of our huge challenges, therefore the need for programs like the Global Drive, and if I may, some important keywords. Indeed, the Global Drive is structured under the umbrella of the 3 Ps. Again, prevention, protection, and prosecution of the crimes. So the different activities and results we will listen today, they are around this, how we can further implement this key DNA of the UN Plan of Action on Safety of Journalists, but also is very important the keyword cooperation. If we don't cooperate more with such a huge challenge, it's impossible to tackle it. So thank you so much for that, for those opening remarks that actually, I guess, have set the scene for our work in the remaining of this session. Welcome again. So for those joining now, we are in this Global Drive on Media Freedom, Freedom of Expression session, joint initiative of UNESCO, the High Commissioner's Office on Human Rights, and the government of the Netherlands under the umbrella of the World Press Freedom Day. So please keep using the hashtag World Press Freedom Day if you are tweeting about this. And now it's my pleasure to turn to our next speaker, and I will, before start with an anecdote. Mr. Tawfik Jelassi, who is our Assistant Director General for Communication Information, he started more or less 1 year ago, and his very first task was to sign with our dear friend, the Dutch ambassador at UNESCO, Ambassador Hans, the initial documents of the Global Drive. So since he's my boss, after he signed and the ambassador left his room, he said, I hope you guys are going to implement this very thoroughly, because this was my very first thing signing here. So ADG Jelassi, you have the floor. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Guilherme. Dr. Bahia, it's always nice to see you. And you made such a great speech that I don't know what to add. You are very eloquent and very thorough. But since I prepared some remarks, I may as well go through them. Guilherme, you are absolutely right. Almost 4 days after I joined UNESCO, I was told that I had a signing ceremony with the Dutch ambassador to support freedom of expression and safety of journalists. So Mr. Hans, Ambassador Hans, His Excellency, was the first ambassador among 193 at UNESCO that I met with. And I said, this is a good act to follow on. I will only meet with ambassadors if they come with a generous donation to UNESCO and to support us in our work. So you are right. I still vividly remember that signing ceremony. And again, I thank the government of the Netherlands for their generous support and support financial, but also their inputs, their recommendations, their encouragements that we continue building jointly on our achievements and our actions. And Dr. Bahia reminded us of some of these achievements on the ground. So welcome again to this special session showcasing the global drive for media freedom and safety of journalists. A very important session in the context of our 2022 World Press Freedom Day and Conference here in Punta del Este, Uruguay. Also, I would like to welcome our colleagues from the Office of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights. We are pleased to present together the work that we have been doing and this unique inter-agency collaboration. UNESCO and the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights have a long track record of cooperation. And here, my regards to Ms. Nada Al-Mashif. We have a strong track record cooperating on promoting and fostering the freedom of expression, including co-shaping the UN Plan of Action on the safety of journalists and the issue of impunity. And as Dr. Bahia said, we are celebrating this year, actually on November 3rd and 4th, the 10th anniversary of the UN Plan of Action on the safety of journalists and the issue of impunity. And I would like here to reiterate our thanks to the government of Austria, which has kindly proposed to host a high-level ministerial conference on this occasion next November in Vienna. Our cooperation has taken a new impetus and under this global drive. This initiative, as it was already mentioned, started back at the 2020 World Press Freedom Conference held in The Hague. And following the generous endowment from the Netherlands, the global drive was officially launched last year, almost to the day, in May 2021 at our World Press Freedom Conference held in Windhoek, Namibia. Over this past year, our two agencies have worked together to reinforce media freedom and safety of journalists worldwide. On the UNESCO side, the Global Drive initiative has supported our work through our multi-donor program on freedom of expression and safety of journalists, which we call in short our MDP, the multi-donor program. Through this special account, UNESCO was able to achieve important results on the ground to advance the safety of journalists. And we'll hear this morning from the beneficiaries, as Guilherme said. And I think this is the most important element, in my view. We are not here as a talk shop. We do make speeches, maybe sometimes too many speeches, but we act. We want to see background, we want to see impact on the ground, and that's why it's important to let the media professionals tell us to what extent this global drive has helped them exercise their profession in a safe and, of course, secure manner wherever they are. Let me briefly highlight the following achievements. One, the multi-donor program has supported mechanism for the safety of journalists in 10 countries across Africa. Two, it has reinforced the safety capacities of journalists and duty bearers in 15 countries, regionally and globally. The program has also supported a global study on online violence, especially against women journalists. And the results of these studies have been presented and will continue to be discussed at this conference here. Number four, the program has also enabled rapid responses to recent emergency situations impacting the safety of journalists. Last summer, it was in Afghanistan. Since February 24th, it has been in Ukraine. And finally, the MDP has also strengthened the capacities of thousands of judicial operators from all over the world on international human rights standards by expanding the UNESCO Judges Initiative, which since 2013 has offered training to more than 23,000 judicial operators coming from 150 countries. Today, you'll hear from colleagues, but also the beneficiaries on the ground, as I said, on some of these projects and initiatives that have influenced their work. The Global Drive and our collaboration of the past year with the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights enabled us to expand our activities on media safety and to offer our support to new countries. We invite donors to extend their support, because with your support, we can do more, and we can further build on the results and the achievements that we have realized to date. As we celebrate the 10th anniversary of the UN Plan of Action on the safety of journalists and the issue of impunity, I wish to highlight how important this kind of interagency collaboration is. I hope that the example of the Global Drive will inspire more joint actions across the entire UN system and with partners, enabling us to continue together building a safer environment for media professionals around the world. Thank you.
Thank you, ADG, Mr. Jelassi. And as you could notice by Mr. Jelassi's initial remarks, the three P's are there. When we talk about capacity building of judges and prosecutors, is about enhancing the capacity to prosecute the crimes. When we are talking about our initiatives in crisis situations like it is now the case, unfortunately, of the war in Ukraine or in Afghanistan, we are talking about straightforward protection. What we did in Ukraine, for instance, was actually delivering protective equipment for journalists covering the war. And what we are doing here in the World Press Freedom Day, raising awareness about the importance of press freedom, helps a lot with prevention elements all over the world regarding freedom of expression and safety of journalists. And before introducing my next speaker, Nada Al-Mashif, the Deputy High Commissioner of Human Rights, I want to tell another anecdote. The last time I saw Nada was in Brussels in a joint activity between UNESCO, the High Commissioner's Office, and the European Union under the umbrella of the Global Drive, and the day was February 24th. The exact day that this war has started. And with Nada and Irene Khan, that is also here in this conference, we said, well, we will need to reshape a little bit the implementation of the Global Drive to tackle this new urgency. And this is precisely what we are doing, UNESCO and the High Commissioner, with the Global Drive, because obviously this emergency, I came recently from a mission to Lviv in Ukraine, and we heard that there are 5,000 journalists and media workers that are registered to cover this war. So this is a massive amount of colleagues from the media that need our support. So let's hear the video by Nada, the Deputy High Commissioner. So please, the video.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, I'm pleased to join you today with my UNESCO colleague, Assistant Director General Jelassi, and our dear friend, the distinguished Ambassador Tahzib-Lie of the Netherlands. And let me start by paying tribute to the Netherlands for the generous support that they provide for this global drive for media freedom and safety of journalists. This Global Drive initiative comes at a critical global juncture. Journalists and media workers operate today under grave threats, their security increasingly at risk across conflict zones, in countries with restricted civic space or high levels of organized crime, and even in so-called safe and democratic spaces. The figures are worrying, but even more so the trends. Increasing numbers of journalists detained worldwide, legal proceedings increasingly being used against investigative journalists to obstruct their work, prevalent impunity for the killings of journalists, and now the new threats posed by digital surveillance, the theme of this year's World Press Freedom Day. In this context, 54 governments signed the Hague Commitments to increase the safety of journalists in December of 2020. They committed to, and I quote, create or maintain effective prevention and protection measures as well as effective mechanisms at the national level, unquote. Through this commitment, governments agreed to receive alerts on threats and violence experienced by journalists and media workers. They also decided to act to ensure that investigations into these incidents are prompt and effective, and that perpetrators are brought to justice. Building on this, and with the Netherlands' support, OHCHR and UNESCO have designed a roadmap articulated around two goals that aim at, first, fostering an independent and free media and public recognition of the value of access to information, and second, strengthening the protection and accountability for violations against journalists. For our part, this office has identified activities that are being implemented by over 15 field presences covering more than 20 countries. These include research on specific themes such as counterterrorism, civic space and democracy, and constitution building, as well as on the status of the media and the safety of journalists in some regions, including the Balkans and the Asia-Pacific regions, with the aim to fine-tune and tailor OHCHR advocacy. Our advocacy initiatives will also be enhanced through workshops, meetings, and policy dialogues, like the one we organized last February by our office in Brussels on media pluralism and strategic lawsuits against public participation, SLAPs, that aim to inject international human rights norms, standards, and jurisprudence into European Union initiatives to protect journalists, media freedom, and pluralism in general. Global Drive activities also comprise training of journalists, media workers, and professional associations to increase their knowledge of their human rights, build communities of practice, and improve their awareness on protection measures. For example, last October, our office held a workshop in Senegal covering human rights-based reporting as well as protection of journalists. This year, we are expanding this activity, including with the follow-up workshop on international human rights protection mechanisms and the leadership workshop for women journalists in Senegal, as well as in Togo and possibly Ivory Coast. We are developing a series of webinars starting the second half of this year for United Nations country teams to enhance their knowledge on the safety of journalists and improve their capacity to monitor and report on attacks against them, as well as develop and support protection strategies on the ground. The Global Drive initiative also seeks to strengthen our office's capacity to monitor and report on attacks against journalists, for instance, through the development of RightStat, an online platform providing, among others, indicators on violence against journalists that you will hear more about during this session. The quality of our engagement and sustainability of our results is a testament to our strong partnership and close cooperation with UNESCO. Our two organizations had already collaborated, notably through the co-chairing of the United Nations Focal Points Network on the safety of journalists. However, the implementation of this Global Drive initiative has highlighted additional synergies between us, adding a new impetus to our cooperation in the future, especially as we celebrate this year the 10th anniversary of the United Nations Plan of Action on the Safety of Journalists and the Issue of Impunity. I trust you will be able to see for yourselves from the highlights we are presenting today. Thank you very much for your support and collaboration.
Yes, we saw then a very interesting summary also from the Human Rights Commissioner perspective, High Commissioner's perspective, what we are doing thanks to this Global Drive initiative. And as Nada has said, is completely connected with the UN Plan of Action. And one thing that we are very proud of, Renaud here, my dear colleague, and myself, with our different teams are implementing this, is the possibility of strongly engaging the United Nations country teams in this story. Because as the name says, it's a United Nations Plan of Action. It's not a UNESCO Plan of Action. It's not a High Commissioner's Plan of Action. We are proud to be coordinating it, but it's very important, it's crucial that resident coordinators all over the world and the other members of the UN country teams are also engaged on that. And indeed, with the UN Staff College, during this week here in the World Press Freedom Day, we are having a training for resident coordinators from Latin America on this topic. And as Nada has said, the High Commissioner is organizing follow-up trainings in different parts of the world. And this is absolutely central to tackle this issue. And the other important connection is with the 2030 agenda. The SDG 1610.1 is an explicit mandate we received from our 193 member states in 2015 that safety of journalists should be in the center also of the development agenda. As the UN Secretary General said in the opening remarks to this World Press Freedom Conference, press freedom is essential for democracy, for the protection and promotion of other human rights, but also for inclusive and sustainable development. And therefore, the monitoring process related to SDG 1610.1 is a central piece of this puzzle. And in that sense, it's my great pleasure to invite my dear colleague, Marc Titus Cebreros, who is connecting late evening in the Philippines. He is the human rights officer in charge of the statistics of the SDG 1610.1, and within, again, the umbrella of the Global Drive, as Nada has already underlined, he is coordinating the right stats part of this story. And so, Marc, please tell us, what are the good news from your side? You have the floor, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Guilherme. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone who's connected to this discussion. On behalf of the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, and specifically the team, the small team of human rights indicators and data specialists that I'm part of, I'm very happy to be part of this afternoon's discussion. So in terms of good news, two things to summarize what I'm going to say. First is that the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, in partnership with UNESCO and with the International Labour Organization, as you know, we are the custodians of the SDG Indicator 16.10.1 that tracks the killings and attacks against human rights defenders, journalists, and trade unionists. So we have been working on this indicator, and in order to level up the global monitoring of attacks against journalists and human rights defenders, we are working on a web scraper that's going to, in a way, automate the generation of leads that would then be documented and further looked into and verified by the UN across the world in terms of attacks against journalists and human rights defenders. So this web scraper responds to a big gap that we have seen in terms of global monitoring, because due to limited capacity and limited footprint, we're only able to get as many cases as are reported by national human rights institutions, by protection mechanisms, by journalists associations themselves, or by NGOs, and by UN presences worldwide. Which tends to be concentrated in cities, leaving out rural areas, also tends to be limited to certain types of journalists or certain types of human rights defenders, and also with very little footprint or reach in social media. So with this web scraper, we're able to have a wider reach of available data sources, and also, in a way, automate the process of leads generation. So the web scraper, if you're familiar with this methodology, it relies on natural language processing in order to look into different sources online, identify which incidents that are being described by these sources can be relevant to the indicator, and then subject these sources to a form of credibility assessment. And then recommend certain follow-up actions to human rights monitors like ourselves. in order to look into those relevant incidents. So this greatly improves the capacity of the UN across the world to look into these different cases of attacks, not just killings, but even the non-lethal attacks, which, as the Deputy High Commissioner mentioned and others have mentioned, are increasing across the world at the moment. The other good news is the fact that the Office of the Commissioner for Human Rights, through the Global Drive, is now developing a dashboard, not just any dashboard, but one that for the first time puts together data on safety of journalists through 16.10.1, as well as other human rights indicators. So this is a platform by which the data can be widely disseminated, visualized, and also customized. So we're going to offer this dashboard in the future as a solution for UN country teams and also for national stakeholders in order to visualize and present their data for different purposes. So in terms of, in summary, these two pieces of work from leads generation in order to come up with solid indicators data, as well as providing a communication platform for data dissemination and exchange are what we're focusing on for our team under the Global Drive funded by the Netherlands that we are discussing this afternoon. So this is part of our efforts to level up the global monitoring of safety of journalists and human rights defenders, and moreover to be able to come up with tools that will be useful even at country level. So in summary, I have a few slides to present, but due to limited bandwidth, I'll be able to share it with you, and so the participants can look into that later. But in summary, this is what some of the exciting news happening on our side. Thanks, and over to you, Guilherme.
Thank you so much, Marc. And I can tell you that Renaud and I, we have been, and Mali that is also here, we have been discussing with resident coordinators this week that one important aspect of the monitoring process is when you have special events that might raise the tension regarding the safety of journalists. And one of those special events are obviously elections. So I also wish all the luck with the Philippine UN country team, because you have elections in this weekend. So let's hope that safety of journalists will be under close attention during these events in the Philippines. And for that, we need monitoring. So ADG, Jelassi, Ambassador Bahia, we need to add an M to the 3 Ps. It's about prevention, protection, and prosecution, but the cross-cutting element is monitoring. So we need to increase our monitoring tools. We need to foster them because, and we need to also acknowledge that we as the United Nations system, we have been failing to go beyond the monitoring of the killings. The SDG 1610.1 obviously mentioned the killings, but as Marc has said, it has other elements. But thanks to the Global Drive, I think we are being able to correct that problem in our own capacity of monitoring, and this is really appreciated. So Marc, thank you so much for explaining to us where you are with the right stat. So now I was requested here with, you know, they give me some things that I need to follow because they don't trust me as a moderator. So the thing that they are telling me here I need to do is to take out my hat of moderator and put my hat of UNESCO implementer, and quickly explaining one other thing we are doing under the chapeau of the Global Drive, which is also very much connected with the monitoring aspect. As most of you know, within the universal system of human rights, a central monitoring tool is the Universal Periodical Review Process, the UPR. So thanks again to the Global Drive, what we are doing is fostering and enhancing the capacity of the relevant stakeholders to engage in a more in-depth way with the UPR process when the topic is freedom of expression, access to information, and safety of journalists. We have been doing that now for quite a while. after we noticed a very promising statistics. With the Sciences Po University in Paris, we have done some research and we analyzed all the 80,000 recommendations that countries have accepted in the first 3 cycles of the UPR process. And the promising statistic is that 4% of those 80,000 recommendations are about freedom of expression. And it might seem a small number, but it's not, because when we are talking about the recommendations about all the human rights. So the good news is that there is interest in reporting about freedom of expression and safety of journalists. What we need to improve is the quality of this reporting, and particularly the quality of implementing the recommendations that the member states have already accepted. So what we are doing now is to produce a series of guidelines for the relevant stakeholders from their perspective, how they can contribute more with the UPR process. So the first guidelines we have launched is precisely guidelines for resident coordinators. So when the UN country teams are providing their reports to the UPR and when they are engaging with the implementation of the recommendations, what they can do better and what they can do more. The other relevant stakeholder are national human rights institutes. Obviously, they already interact a lot with the UPR process, but we are sure that they can engage more with the freedom of expression and safety of journalists component. A third key stakeholder here are the journalists themselves, in both ways, when they are reporting the violence against them and when they are doing the journalist work of reporting on the UPR process. So how they can cover better the UPR from a journalist perspective. A fourth important stakeholder are freedom of information commissioners, because we can't forget that access to information is an integral part of the freedom of expression right. So we also produced and are in a very interesting discussion with them. And last but not least, obviously, civil society organizations. Although the global organizations, many of them represented here in this forum, Article 19, Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, they are quite used to produce shadow reports and engage with the UPR process. This is not necessarily true for grassroots organizations. So we partnered with Amnesty International to deliver a series of workshops, trainings, and materials for grassroots civil society organizations so that they can be better prepared to engage with the UPR process. So in a nutshell, together with the High Commissioner's Office, as you can see, we are betting a lot on the SDG 1610.1. This is the work that Marc described to you through the right stat, and betting a lot as well on the UPR process. So we do think these 2 global monitoring tools, together with the Director General's report on the safety of journalists and the issue of impunity that is produced every 2 years, we can offer to the global community and to the national governments evidence to produce evidence-based policy in this area. So this obviously is the final goal. So now, more important than listening us from headquarters, let's invite some field colleagues to give their perspective on this implementation of the global drive. This is, Mr. Jelassi and Ambassador Bahia, another interesting thing that this support from the Netherlands has allowed us to do, to really offer to our colleagues in the huge field network of UNESCO and the High Commissioner's Office the possibility of implementing country-level perspective aspects of the global drive. So now we are going to hear 2 testimonies, one from my dear colleague Lydia Gachungi. She is based in our office in Addis Ababa, with an important element there, the continental platform on safety of journalists in Africa. And then we are going to listen a testimony also from Katia Chrizzi from the High Commissioner's Office. She will speak about the community of practice in Southeast Asia. Both elements, again, possible thanks to the global drive. So please, can we see the 2 videos?
Greetings from Bangkok. It is a pleasure to speak to you about the planned activities of the UN Human Rights Regional Office for Southeast Asia as part of the Global Drive for Media Freedom, Access to Information and the Safety of Journalists in 2022. In Asia, as in other parts of the world, civic and democratic space is increasingly under pressure. The free flow of reliable information and the ability for people to access it, express themselves, criticize and debate is the cornerstone of any democratic society. For years, however, we have observed a rise in the scale and number of attacks against journalists and media workers, as well as curbs on their ability to exercise freedom of expression. This includes threats of prosecution, arrest, imprisonment, denial of journalistic access, and failure to investigate and prosecute crimes against them. During the COVID-19 pandemic, we have also documented new constraints on the media and seen legislation introduced to restrict information perceived by governments as critical of their policies. In response, our regional office has provided extensive support to women journalists and media workers in 2020 and 2021, in line with our mandate to promote and protect human rights, and specifically in light of the need to strengthen actors at the regional level. A few months ago, we completed a 10-month-long online training for 42 women journalists from 15 countries in Asia in collaboration with UN Women and in close partnership with UNESCO to strengthen their capacity to claim their rights and to access the existing UN mechanisms for protection and other means to increase their safety, including digital security. This year, as part of the Global Drive, we will launch another program building on the best practices of our pilot training program with 3 distinct but connected parts: an online self-learning program, a series of live webinars that will allow for sharing of experiences and shared learning, and in-person country-specific events, COVID-19 allowing. We will continue to share knowledge and opportunities to leverage protection through the use of the UN human rights mechanism and explore concrete means to enhance protection of women journalists. This is a considerable challenge, however, and one we cannot face alone. The importance of our collaboration with UNESCO and other key regional partners cannot be overstated. We are also grateful to Sweden and the Netherlands for the support extended to this critical work. World Press Freedom Day reminds us how important the media is for democracy and human rights, and with your support we will continue to do our part to promote the rights and protection of journalists, media workers, and human rights defenders in the region. Thank you.
UNESCO in Africa has taken a multi-stakeholder approach when it comes to the implementation of the UN Plan of Action on the safety of journalists. This has been a concerted effort through mobilizing different stakeholders. For example, in 2018, UNESCO, with the support of the multi-donor program on freedom of expression and the safety of journalists, came together with the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights in Addis Ababa and joined efforts with the African Union and different stakeholders, including the African Union member states, the prosecutors, the police, and the judges. And through the recommendations that came from this meeting, several national coordination mechanisms for the safety of journalists have been established in Africa. For example, the Deputy Minister of Information from Ghana, who was one of the key participants in this meeting, continued with these efforts and did establish the National Coordination Mechanism for the Safety of Journalists in Ghana. This has proved to be one of the platforms where journalists have found very, very useful in addressing issues concerning the safety of journalists in the country. Out of this, a culmination of conferences and seminars and consultation at different levels, at sub-regional levels in Africa, at national levels, several national coordination mechanisms have been established in consultation with the duty bearers and the right bearers. We have also come together with African Union 4 bodies that were never part of safety of journalists mechanisms in Africa. And in 2021 January, the digital platform for the Safety of Journalists in Africa was launched by the President of Southern Africa, who was the chairperson of the African Union. This is just to say that efforts to implement the UN Plan of Action have only proved very, very successful where the different stakeholders have been engaged. And this is a process that we are using, again, to review and even to consult and identify the gaps on the UN Plan of Action with a view to strengthening this platform that has proved very useful.
Thank you, Lydia. Thank you, Katia. And you could see how in those two regions, the African region and the Southeast Asia, the program is really taking shape and it's being implemented. And it was very concrete results. I can add just one. In December last year, we had a training of trainers in Nairobi for judicial institutions from 13 African countries. And just last week, these trainers that were trained in Nairobi already started doing national training. So Senegal had the first training with almost all of the justices from the Supreme Court also attending. So we are really moving here the agenda in terms of engaging very relevant stakeholders in this process. It's not only about the executive power, it's not only about civil society organizations, not only about journalists, it's about also judges and prosecutors and tech companies. And all those different stakeholders are being convened thanks to the convening power of United Nations, either UNESCO or the High Commissioner's Office or our both offices together in several occasions. And now, to finalize this showcase, let's hear from a national perspective, which is also very interesting. Thanks to all this movement, our offices in Baghdad, in Iraq, also approached the bilateral Dutch embassy there and further developed the global drive under a specific new initiative called Breaking the Silence. And this is very interesting because one of the key issues in terms of safety of journalists is also how we engage the UN political missions and the UN peacekeeping missions in this story. So we are going to hear from Mr. Florian Hazesberg. He is a senior human rights officer in the United Nations Assistance Mission for Iraq about these activities that, again, are possible thanks to the logic the UNESCO and the High Commissioner's Office are implementing, globally speaking, with the global drive. So let's watch this new video. Thanks a lot for the technicians here.
Journalists, bloggers, human rights activists, and others who question or criticize actions of authorities here in Iraq often may face intimidation, threats and harassment, as well as also sometimes arbitrary arrest and detention. In relation to freedom of expression, the situation of female journalists and bloggers is of particular concern in a profession that is largely the domain of men. Within the frames of the Global Drive for Media Freedom and Safety of Journalists initiative, the Human Rights Office of the United Nations Assistance Mission for Iraq plans to implement a series of activities throughout 2022 to address the specific needs of female journalists. Our major focus will be cooperation with the Iraqi Women Journalist Forum, where we intend to reach out to female journalists throughout all governorates of Iraq. This is in order to discuss issues of human rights, but also safety, concerns and any obstacles to implement journalistic activities and suggest solutions thereto. In this relation, we will implement a training of trainers program for female journalists, focusing on reporting on freedom of expression, media freedom and safety of journalists, including in the online space, in particular based on a perspective of gender and human rights of women. Since UNESCO here in Iraq implemented already many activities on the protection and safety of journalists, in particular through their project called Breaking the Silence, We have numerous entry points for both of our agencies to coordinate and cooperate with each other in order to maximize the impact of our work. Throughout the year, we aim to enhance the practical skills of women journalists and bloggers on a right-based approach to reporting, while at the same time improve their capacities that this can be done in a safe and secure manner.
Salam, dear. I have received about 10 online threats about my work each month, in addition to the phone calls from unknown who threatened me, and they threatened that if I'm not going to stop, they will do this and that to me. And violence here in Iraq is something very, and threats of doing something violent is not to be neglected, because this is a country which is dangerous to the journalists. So I used the www.ifdrt-IQ platform, which was released by the UNESCO office in Baghdad, and I reported the threats on January 2022, and I received a case code, and then I met the investigator judge to approve my report. And 2 months later, maybe 3, I don't recall it, but it was in March 2022 that I have been informed that the police reached the person who was threatening me through the number and through monitoring the income and outcome calls, and he was doing that from a neighboring country. Thank you very much, and I'm here to express my gratitude to the UNESCO office and the Judiciary Committee, who were very responsive and cooperative with me to support me and to guarantee my safety. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and it's always very encouraging when we see that what we are doing is actually getting, as ADG was saying, it's beyond the talk shop. It's concrete results. The challenge is how we scale this up. The good news is that since this initiative is engaging 23,000 judges and prosecutors all over the world, we hope that others like these judges from Iraq that were very open to implement international standards in their decisions will be the case everywhere. So that's our hope, but we need all of you to do this, to keep this ball rolling, because the price of freedom, as someone said, is a permanent vigilance. So we need to keep doing this again and again to make sure that what we are doing here, and we started a few years ago, will indeed have results like this one we just heard. So now, sorry that we are a bit late, but I guess we are almost there. It's my pleasure to ask my dear friend, Renaud de Villaine. He is the High Commissioner's advisor on media freedom and the safety of journalists, to offer some concluding remarks from your perspective. Renaud.
Thank you, Guilherme. If I have to retain 3 words of today's presentation, is needed, complementarity, and results. Really, the Global Drive initiative is a needed initiative. It was said by many of the intervenants today because of the impunity for the killings of journalists, because of the rise of detention of journalists worldwide, because of the rise of harassment online and offline, but also because of new challenges, including surveillance, which is the theme of this year's World Press Freedom Day, and also legal harassment. And as for the digital surveillance, really this day was the occasion for the High Commissioner, but also for the Special Rapporteur on the freedom of expression, to repeat the call for a moratorium on the use, sale, transfer, and service of digital surveillance technologies. So that shows also the importance of international days like the World Press Freedom Day. The second word is complementarity. Really, the global drive is the occasion for more complementarity in the approach with this 3 Ps approach that was repeated by Guilherme and many of the participants. I repeat, prevention, protection, and prosecution. And as Guilherme said, maybe the cross-cutting approach is more monitoring and more reporting. As for prevention, this is very important. Prevention through awareness raising, and we had many examples of awareness raising activities, including the organization of International Day like this one. But also prevention through accountability, more accountability, and that's what we are trying to do, our 2 organizations are trying to do through many activities: support to judge, support to journalists, support to professional associations in order to help journalists to have their case being heard in justice. That's the first part of complementarity. The second part of complementarity is really the complementarity between OHCHR and UNESCO, and the global drive is really a unique occasion to, as it was said by our Deputy High Commissioner Nada, to give really a new impetus to the cooperation between OHCHR and UNESCO. A new impetus that is all the more needed as it was said, we are celebrating this year, the 10th anniversary of the UN Plan of Action. Then the third word will be results, and really the global drive is meant to be a result-based initiative with already many achievements that were showcased today. But as the ambassador of the Netherlands said, this is also time for more results, and hopefully during the year we will achieve more results and as well as in the coming years. So my last word will be thank you for the Netherlands for your support on this very, very critical initiative. And thank you also for UNESCO for hosting this event and for the good cooperation that we have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Renaud. It's indeed a great cooperation. And ADD Jelassi and Ambassador Bahia that is still connected. Maybe another concrete example of how these things are moving in a good direction is that yesterday, for the first time in the history of the World Press Freedom Day, we had the presidents of the 3 governing bodies of the United Nations system in charge of implementing the policy on safety of journalists, the president of the UNESCO General Conference, the president of the Human Rights Council, and the president of the UN General Assembly, here reaffirming the support of our governing bodies to this. So again, I'm sure you agree, ADG, that this is another good sign towards November, where we are going to mark the 10th anniversary of the UN Plan of Action. Over to you for your concluding remarks.
Thank you very much, Guilherme. I always find this type of testimonies from media professionals on the ground. I find them very moving. I find them very touching. This is not New York. This is not Paris. This is not The Hague. This is not Geneva. This is Ethiopia, and this is Thailand, and this is Iraq, and this is the Philippines. And, you know, we heard from Marc, Lydia, Katia, Florian, and the lady journalist, how this has impacted their lives. I think we should try to put ourselves for just a day, to be in their shoes for a day and feel what it is like to bring the truth, to cover war, conflict, to start today with a high level of uncertainty, with the danger, with the risk, in an explosive environment of war and conflicts. What is it like? We are in a comfort zone. The least that we can do is to walk the talk. The least that we can do is to act. And the least that we can do is to aim for more impact on the ground for the benefit of these media professionals, the benefits of society, and the benefits of democracy at the end. So I hope that more donors, more supporters will join us. Please reach out and please be with us on such noble cause.
Thank you very much. That's it, but we still have more in the World Press Freedom Day. Please stay connected, those that are connected online. For those here in Punta del Este, we still have a couple more of sessions and the concluding ceremony, the closing ceremony. That's just a formality because we don't want to close anything. We want to keep open for press freedom, open for freedom of expression, open for human rights for all. Thank you very much for following this Global Drive session. Stay connected and keep connected via social media networks using the hashtag World Press Freedom Day. Bye. Stay safe.